All right, hi everybody. Sorry for the few minutes delay. We had some technical glitches, which we'll probably have again in the future on the face of it. Thank you for joining us one more time for this additional edition of the future series webinars. There'll probably be another one. I think there'll be another one, last one in this academic year. End of June on climate change, if I'm not mistaken. But this one today is on generative AI. AI in general, I'm going to be talking a little bit about edtech, the impact that edtech, educational technology, already has had on higher education. More for comparison than because I assume that you don't know about that. Okay, but it's going to be my starting point. But the real topic of the day is generative AI, and in particular the question of whether this is the big capital B revolution, capital R, that most observers and stakeholders are saying that it's going to be like this time is the real time. We announced revolutions previously. Most of the time we were mistaken, or if we were right, it certainly took a while for anyone to see that this was a revolution, which is usually not the definition of a revolution. Revolutions tend to happen quickly. But then a lot of, you can see that across the literature a lot, and I'm sure you're aware of that, it's been now what, since last November, about roughly 6 months since the release of ChatGPT, and the professional and general media is really full of that, full of speculations about how this is going to upend this and this and that, the world of work, the world of news, media, information, knowledge, and of course, higher education as well. So that's what I'm going to focus on today. As I said, to introduce the subject, I'm going to try to focus, but it's going to be very hard for obvious reasons, more on the longer term, possible longer term impact of generative AI on academic work in general, okay? Because I think the main focus, or at least the first focus, the one that we can see emerge right now, is really going to be on academic work rather than, managing an institution, questions of governance, etc., which of course may and will come after that. But whether we're talking about research or the methods of learning and teaching, or the very substance of what is taught and learned, this is really the first focus, okay? So academic work. And as I said, I wanted to start from some observations on the already profound transformations that educational technology, edtech, has already brought about. Because here we have, with this subject, we have about a decade behind us, even a little bit more than that, in which we can observe what has happened, okay? And so this is going to help us raise the question of whether generative AI is going to, in fact, as I said, constitute the revolution that everybody's talking about, or at the end of the day, just be one additional wave of technological transformation in higher education. Okay, so I virtually don't have an outline for this. I simply have two parts. One that provides an overview of the transformations of higher education that have been brought about by edtech. Again, not because you don't know what they are, but to give you a reminder, which would be a good point of comparison. This is already what's behind us. These are the changes that have been happening through the spread of educational technology, and is what is ahead of us in any way comparable. And then, of course, the second part, where I'm going to focus on generative AI and its possible future impact. I'll share screen and show you the outline slide for the heck of it, but I mean, we could have done without also an outline slide, but that'll allow me to get into my slides anyway. Hold on. Okay. All right. So first, edtech, and truly, what we know today about edtech is that it has considerably expanded the reach of post-secondary education. I'm saying post-secondary education rather than higher education because it's broader in this particular case. The edtech has made learning, okay, in that broad sense of post-secondary learning, accessible to population segments who didn't have access before, whether it's in credentialed or non-credentialed form, whether it's in the setting of a university or not, okay? Mainly, this is probably the first most important thing that edtech is being credited for is to expand access to tertiary education, let's say, or post-secondary education possibilities, opportunities for people who had difficulties in having access before or who didn't have access at all, whether that's based on geographical, socioeconomic criteria or age criteria, okay? If you take into account the development of lifelong learning opportunities for, upskilling and reskilling that edtech now offers to working and non-working adults beyond the traditional college age. This is yet another population segment that didn't really have access before to university and tertiary education or post-secondary education solutions before that edtech has allowed to recruit and draw in. edtech has also introduced and allowed for the development of an approach to learning and teaching that's radically different from the traditional pedagogical approaches of the university that evolved through the 20th century. It's done that, here are my points, it's done that essentially by spreading the concept of personalized, flexible learning, in which students learn, first of all, students are at the center of the learning and teaching endeavor, and where they learn at their own convenience based on their own individual needs and at their own pace, etc. All that with learning management systems and digital resources that allow them access to educational contents of multiple forms. In other words, no longer mainly relying on the written text, which, if you think about it, is indeed a huge transformation, okay? But pedagogical material now also includes multimedia material, gamified learning platforms, augmented reality, virtual reality, etc. All of this with clearly defined learning outcomes that are measured in quantitative terms, okay? So all of this, of course, none of which I'm tempted to say even existed as concepts only 20 or 30 years ago in higher education, in universities. edtech has also, and this is one of its key features, transformed tertiary education by turning it into something that is thoroughly data-driven, with data from multiple data points collected, that's my next slides, collected on student performance, on student engagement, on student learning patterns, which allows both institutions and educators to adapt to student needs, and in particular for educators to tailor instruction and interactions with students to individual student learning styles, okay? These are some of the main transformations, okay? So this is just a brief overview of the impact of edtech. There would be a lot more points to mention and to develop, and of course, it's a whole subject unto itself. But let's just leave it at that for now. Raise the question of whether these transformations can be seen as a clear overall improvement over older educational models and approaches, or as a change whose negative sides, whose drawbacks are greater than the potentially positive impact that edtech has had on higher education. To answer this question, of course, the answer to these questions depends on stakeholders, on observers. Everybody has an opinion about that. I would say that I don't know the broad consensus, but when you read the literature and you read the specialized media, general media, on questions of edtech and what impact edtech has had on higher education, you tend to, depending where you look, of course, but you tend to generally see articles and assessments that are rather positive, okay, on the whole, saying that edtech has constituted a real improvement, certainly a significant change, alteration of what is defined by, known as higher education, but on the whole, very positive. In particular, because of the question of access, okay? This is what usually comes first, as far as crediting edtech with having improved the state of higher education in general. So basically a matter of opinion. Now, positive points, again, are talked about a lot, are put forth a lot across the literature. The main criticism that has emerged over the last decade on the impact of edtech tends to center on basically 3 points. First, the negative social and psychological impact that the spread of edtech has had on students and the student learning experience, by reducing direct human interaction in the learning process, okay, in fully online, of course, and asynchronous learning environments, which to many has served to underscore the benefits of face-to-face instruction. By the way, the COVID-19 pandemic has had more or less the same effect. When millions and millions of students across the world studied online through the first hard phase of the pandemic, because they were under severe lockdowns and universities had gone online, the same conclusion was reached by many observers when the pandemic started to trail off, and then students, universities gradually came back to in-person. Those anyway, residential brick and mortar universities gradually came back to in-person teaching and learning, okay? So that has served to underscore the merits, the benefits of face-to-face instruction. Second point of criticism about edtech, it's the over-reliance on technology that can reduce the quality of teaching and learning, in particular by becoming a distraction for the student. This has been I wouldn't say a major criticism, but you see it crop up here and there. The idea that the digital configuration now of learning is a distraction for the student, becomes an activity that's oriented toward entertaining more than it is toward in-depth understanding of content and critical thinking, okay? And the last point of criticism, which is probably the one that we hear the most about, is of course the concern with data security and privacy, given the collection and storage of massive amounts of student data that edtech has made possible. So whatever our overall view of edtech is, I think all of us can acknowledge that edtech has already profoundly transformed higher education, albeit at extremely different degrees across institutions, across regions, across continents, of course, around the world. But at the same time, I think it can also be said that across multiple institutions and academic disciplines in various parts of the world, academic teaching and learning still retains many of the characteristics, many of the features of pre-edtech era. And I think that these features are, for the main, one, subject matter expertise is still there, okay? The promotion of critical thinking, still there, even actually stronger with the advent of edtech. So it might not be practiced and taught in exactly the same way as it was 20 or 30 years ago, okay? But it is still, it's a leading skill. And by critical thinking, what is meant here is not necessarily the kind of the skill that is immediately transferable to the labor market, that is immediately transferable to a job that we now hear about in the context of the edtech transformations, but really critical thinking in terms of the ability to, read a text, read material, study material, and develop your critical mind in order to take distance from it, analyze it, assess it, et cetera, et cetera. That kind of critical thinking, in other words, the traditional classical definition of critical thinking. Another feature of higher education, traditional higher education, that has remained is the resilience of in-person teaching and learning, and of meaningful thought-provoking interactions between instructors and students. In other words, the kind of unalterated human interaction that, higher education universities have been really the locus of for centuries. The fourth thing to have survived is the competence of instructors in providing students with guidance and feedback. Okay, that is still there, of course. And last but not least, the persistence of ethical rules. In research, in academic integrity, ethical rules regarding plagiarism, proper citation, respect for intellectual property rights. Even if this particular item, ethical rules, the ethical dimension of academic work, has been particularly challenged indeed by the development of digital technologies and educational technologies, okay? Can't really say it's been under assault. It's been a lot more problematic, say, over the last 10 years than it used to be. Why? Simply because, among other factors, digital technology offers many, many more possibilities simply of copying and pasting, et cetera, et cetera. So it's been more of an issue, but the rules are there nevertheless. Anything that has to do with academic integrity is still upheld by universities as a golden rule. And something that I haven't even really heard some arguments to the effect that, we should be a little bit more flexible because we're now in a digital environment that's very different as a learning and working and researching environment than the way things were 20, 30 years ago. I haven't even heard that kind of argument. If anything, there is more debate now. There is more concern with academic integrity than was the case even a couple of decades ago, simply because there are many more threats coming from the digital configuration that academic work has today to academic integrity, okay? So now the question again, okay? I'll put the question again. The question regarding generative AI is whether with generative AI, we're going to either, these are basically the two options that I mentioned at the beginning in my introduction, whether we are going to, witness just one more wave of technological transformation that universities will also eventually adapt to, whether they're enthusiastic about it, whether they see it as a way to enhance the quality and access to higher education, or are reluctant, okay? because here again, they'll see embracing generative AI as simply becoming inevitable, so they will reluctantly adapt. This has been pretty much the case, these two, roughly these two categories of institutions with the adoption of edtech over the years. Or other possibility, option B, are we going to go through a radically disrupting transformation of higher education that will truly make the long-established modes of learning and teaching a thing of the past? Okay, and so that's my second part, generative AI. I want to start here by saying that the innovative dimension of generative AI is that it relies on, which of course you all know, but as a starting point, it's good to go back to definitions, that generative AI relies on algorithms that can create entirely new content. Okay, and that's really the so-called revolutionary feature. They can create entirely new content in multiple forms that go well beyond text, that include code, audio, images, simulations, videos, and therefore generative AI has the potential to drastically change everything that's related to content creation. Okay, that's the main point about it. The realization of how disruptive this might be to higher education dawned on university actors with the eruption of ChatGPT last November, very abruptly. The launch of ChatGPT in November of last year pretty much took the entire world by surprise. Had not been really announced, not to mention touted. It hadn't really been, so it took the entire world by surprise, and in particular universities, I would say. And even what ChatGPT already offers was taken a major step further with the release last March by OpenAI, which is the creator of ChatGPT, of the enhanced version of ChatGPT, which is GPT-4. GPT-4 can do things major things that ChatGPT cannot do. In particular, GPT-4 can interpret images and can tutor students, meaning that it can provide intellectual, quote unquote, answers to student queries and serve as knowledgeable, again, quote unquote, in quotation marks, guide in shaping the student learning, okay, which is something that ChatGPT cannot really do. Let me go to the next slide. These are like concrete things, comparative points between the two versions. ChatGPT already demonstrated impressive performances, for example, in taking and passing academic exams. Here, for example, OpenAI indicated that GPT-4 could do better on exams. OpenAI claimed that GPT-4 scored 298 out of 400 in the American bar exam, which you can see there on this slide, and 163 in the law school admissions test, the LSAT, which is taken by prospective law students in the US and Canada, in a growing number of additional countries, compared with 213 and 149 with ChatGPT. Knowing, for example, that for the LSAT, a score of at least 160 is necessary to get into a top-ranking law school. So you can see that ChatGPT doesn't quite get there with 149, but GPT-4 does with 163, a score of 163 on the SAT. In addition, ChatGPT-4's ability to interpret images means, for example, that students can take a photo of an exam question that has pictures, that has diagrams, for example, or charts, and submit it to GPT-4 for a response. An additional major difference between the two versions is that GPT-4 can summarize entire research papers and generate text up to 25,000 words. 25,000 words, that's about 50 pages, all of it in one go. Meaning that academics and students can ask GPT-4 to virtually generate research papers, okay? Something that is virtually certain to become a huge challenge for academic publishing, okay? But we're only at the dawn of this, so we can't really yet see the potential impact of that. More generally, given how recent the emergence of this technology is, there's no comprehensive, consolidated data available yet on how universities have been coping with generative AI. Again, by most accounts, we are only at the threshold of what further generative AI innovations will be able to accomplish, okay? So what we can see from here exclusively really is that the first short-term response across universities. We can see that the main short-term concern across colleges and universities has focused on how students could use the technology to cheat, very simply. And that's a real concern because the software, the kind of software that has been in use for years now to detect plagiarism, of course, doesn't work with ChatGPT or GPT-4. There are detection tools that are being developed, okay, right now, but there's no single yet satisfactory response to this new challenge. And so that has been the concern number one. When ChatGPT first came out, was first released, immediate responses by colleges and universities have ranged from banning outright the use of these tools. That was the case, for example, in my institution where I teach, which I think, you know, it was virtually the death penalty promised to students if they were caught using ChatGPT for a class essay or an exam or something like that, except that when we don't have good detection tools and students know that, then of course the question can be raised of how effective a threat this is. Even when you threaten to expel a student, completely expel the student from the school, if they're caught using ChatGPT, just how effective, how efficient is this when students themselves, of course, know that we don't yet have very efficient detection tools. Although the industry, again, is saying that it's working on it. Okay, so immediate responses from universities have ranged from banning outright the use of generative AI, and in this particular case, of course, ChatGPT, to promoting a full embrace of the generative AI's potential by integrating these tools in the teaching and learning process and guiding students through the use of these tools, advocating through that the development of new skills, with the arguments that students are sure to need these skills in their professional future life. Okay, so why bury your head in the sand? You better embrace and already prepare students for professional life that will obviously require that they know how to use generative AI. So this is like the more optimistic take, or perhaps the more pragmatic one among institutions. In other words, embrace the technology and train students to use it instead of treating it as an enemy. This approach involves promoting the ability to develop critical thinking about, I'm here saying very concretely what some universities have done since last November, introducing the cultivation of this ability to develop critical thinking about the responses proposed by ChatGPT and GPT-4. when prompted, some of which include, at least for now, and it's of course very important to point out because it's been a huge matter of concern, falsehoods, wrong information, data that is simply made up, what is technically called hallucinations in this industry. A major focal point has been whether and how assessment of coursework should be modified to take into account the availability of these tools. Some institutions have chosen to simply revert to formal timed exams administered in a brick and mortar setting, or even online, but with a stronger monitoring technology. Other institutions have began to prioritize different sorts of assessment, more reflective, well-documented pieces of work that call for analytical skills and intellectual subtlety that go beyond what these tools, generative AI tools can offer at the moment. Okay, this is a sample of how universities and colleges have been reacting to the emergence, the eruption, I should say, of ChatGPT on the digital scene. Now, it should be clear that these efforts are only stopgap measures, that are limited, whose effect will be limited in time, and that, of course, won't be able to address the challenges posed to academic work by generative AI in the longer term. Okay, here to finish or go towards the end, I'm going to quote from, or refer to rather, an article from Times Higher Education that was published 2 weeks ago, which identifies 5 ways in which generative AI has already changed higher education. And I think it's more indicative of what the future might be than pure speculation as to where we might be 5 years from now, which, as I'm sure you understand, we certainly don't have the visibility at this point to that we would need in order to assert, here are the main trends, or these are the possible scenarios, because not enough time, again, has elapsed. So this article, you can see 5 ways AI has already changed higher education, appeared on middle of the month, so 2 weeks ago, May 15th, identifies these 5 ways as, first, the fact that generative AI is already prompting education companies to reevaluate their business models. And we're here by education companies, we don't just mean the edtech startups that I discussed, whose impact on higher education I looked into in my first part, but we're also talking about more traditional education companies, such as publishers of educational content, textbook publishers and the like. This is already changing. This industry is already changing because student demands are already changing. Student demands vis-a-vis this industry is already changing as students get increasingly used to working with generative AI. Some edtech companies are already complaining, are already blaming ChatGPT for a decline in the demand of their textbooks, and coursework help services, for example. And they speculate, and it's probably true, even though I haven't really found a detailed, reliable study yet for this particular feature, for this particular phenomenon, but it is speculated that students are now increasingly turning to AI and generative AI for help, okay, rather than purchase textbooks and educational material, coursework help services, or coursework help material. Simply because these new chatbots can generate content. They can, for example, the enhanced versions can produce a textbook or what is comparable to a textbook, or they can produce any given course material when prompted. Okay, now there's a whole debate as to whether there's a question about quality. what is produced by these chatbots is even remotely comparable in quality with the offerings of academic publishers. It is a hotly debated question, but the fact is that students are already using AI for these purposes. And apparently they're not too bothered by the question of quality, of comparative quality. Okay, it's already happening. It's sure to happen at an ever increasing level in the future. Stakeholders in this sector are already warning that bigger companies that are incorporating AI into existing well-established products are those that are having the most success, are those that are likely to survive and even perhaps thrive over the next few years. But that many smaller companies that are unable to do the same will most likely not be able to survive, will most likely disappear. The second change that's already underway is bots that can help with teaching and student support, okay? This is not an entirely new phenomenon, but AI is giving it an unprecedented boost with, for example, ChatGPT able to converse with the user, respond to questions and prompts in far more sophisticated ways than any pre-existing technology. Regarding counseling, these chatbots can provide personal well-being support, even psychological well-being support, available 24/7. Students experiencing with it so far, apparently, according to feedback, have found it reassuring. Here again, notwithstanding the appropriateness of automated psychological assistance and mentoring that's not provided by humans, okay? Students, of course, this generation of digital natives seem to find it reassuring. In terms of teaching assistance proper, the article cites professors of accounting, for example, at the University of Pretoria in South Africa, who use GPT-4-based chatbots to help students better understand accounting concepts. And they say, professors say that's very useful in large classes where individual tutoring, classes, for example, with several hundreds of students enrolled, where individual tutoring by instructors is impossible. And that's a feature that is likely to increase the already acute crisis of faculty recruitment in many parts of the world, as universities are constantly seeking to cut additional costs. That's a phenomenon we're all familiar with that has been developing gradually over the past decade and a half, up to 2 decades. The third change involves admissions, interestingly, for which students can now also use ChatGPT and the like to write application essays, okay? So the concern is not just academic essays during the year to complete the assignments for a course, or using ChatGPT or similar technologies for exams, but also to write application essays, which is already prompting some universities to seek to incorporate different material in the application file. For example, audio or video material, or prompting students to submit social media posts instead of the traditional essay. Okay, so that's more in the area, that's more a challenge and a problem and an issue. On the other hand, let's say on the plus side, AI has already proved very helpful in assisting staff with the processing and assessing of the tens of thousands of applications that some colleges and universities receive each year. Number 4 change that's already underway. AI tools have already been guiding literature searches for several years, and new products are emerging that are likely to disrupt this activity even further. These tools can identify widely cited papers, provide refined analysis of where they are cited, in what publications, with what level of prestige, etc. And finally, number 5, I think I have, do I have yeah, I do have actually, sorry, I should have turned to this earlier, a slide with the 5 different ways in which generative AI in general, but generative AI in particular has already had an impact on universities. The 5th one is the fact that AI natural language processing tools have already been in use for a handful of years, as is the case with number 4, for scanning tens of thousands of papers on a given subject, for giving short summaries of papers' contents that are more immediately intelligible than abstracts, which sometimes are based on a lot of jargon, especially if, as an academic, you're using a cross-disciplinary approach and you're not necessarily utterly familiar with the jargon of another discipline. These tools will provide you with a quality summary that doesn't use jargon, that is intelligible immediately. These tools assess the quality of these papers. And what that does is, of course, significantly reduce the time spent by researchers, by students, of course, writing essays on source screening. And it's an advantage that is particularly being felt by people with a humanities background, who can otherwise spend entire days reading single books or single articles that they need as sources for their own work, okay? So all of these are changes that are already underway, that we see, that have been prompted by AI in general and generative AI in particular, with certainly a leap forward, a massive leap forward that is, I don't know if it's forward or backward, but a leap certainly that's already observable. Even though it's been a very short time altogether since the release of ChatGPT, and even more GPT-4 last March, 2 months ago. The question of whether all of this is, a net positive, all of these changes, that's of course highly debatable. It is fiercely debated right now in the professional literature. In learning and teaching, for example, many voices have expressed the fear that these tools will hamper authentic learning by encouraging students to take shortcuts, to avoid the difficulty of doing their own search for sources, of doing their own critical thinking, avoid the difficulty of looking for original ideas, difficulty of organizing their thoughts, of acquiring and demonstrating knowledge on any given subject, okay? These critical voices, they complain that the previous waves of technologization of higher education already aimed at making studying easier, which they don't see as necessarily a good thing, because they see easier studying, easier learning as something that impoverishes the learning experience, something that deprives the learning experience of challenges. And they argue that generative AI in the longer run will deprive learners of fundamental functionalities that have defined human learning for centuries. Regarding research, I chose to mention only one critical voice, but it's a leading one. It's a voice of professor in management and organization at the Grenoble École of Management here in France. His name is Dirk Lindebaum. He's thoroughly against the use of ChatGPT and related technologies, of course, GPT-4 for researchers. He says that researchers who embrace ChatGPT are like, this is his expression, not mine, are like turkeys voting for Christmas. This is what he says. He says he fears that the technology also threatens to impoverish research, destroy the human ability, he says, to understand the social world. He notes that ChatGPT already acts in effect as a co-author in a growing number of papers, in particular in social science disciplines. And what he sees in this whole phenomenon is 3 major dangers. One, and I don't think I have, do I have a slide recapping that? No, I don't. First major danger, the fact that using this technology to compile literature reviews will impoverish, again, researchers' analytical skills, he says, and theoretical imagination, because he argues, while researchers read for understanding, for expanding their own knowledge, ChatGPT, if it begins to do it for them, ChatGPT cannot understand the literature. ChatGPT is not a tool that understands anything the way that humans do. And so what ChatGPT does is it can only predict the statistical likelihood of what the next word should be in a given sentence, right? And so Lindebaum's argument is that this is fostering thinking that is inside rather than outside the box. Number two danger or challenge, he says the use of ChatGPT, especially in social science research, generalizes a computational approach to theorizing problems, in which morality is considered a universally applicable phenomenon, and it excludes judgment that's sensitive to the local phenomena, to the local social historical context of phenomena. And his third major criticism, what he fears, danger that he fears, is the fact that ChatGPT, he says, in research, distorts the conditions for a truly competitive marketplace of ideas, because academics, he says academics are under pressure to publish in order to advance their career. Having these tools at their disposal will mean that there will be increasingly, academics, researchers will be increasingly tempted to skip the hard part, to skip the hard thinking, the hard writing work that goes into scientifically valuable papers, that actually comes to nurture the marketplace of ideas and the advancement of science in favor of the quantity, and the ever-growing publication record that ChatGPT and comparable tools will make it possible for academics and researchers to achieve. Okay, so these are his three major fears. To conclude, we can say, would be that all of that as it may, of course, again, it's not a surprise. It won't come to a surprise to anyone as a surprise if I say that it's far too early to make substantial predictions about how disruptive the impact of generative AI on higher education is going to be. But it's already clear that as disruptive as we thought edtech had already been, generative AI is likely to be far more disruptive yet, as I'm sure anyone can realize from just the few possible effects that I've already mentioned, that I've mentioned here. It is likely to affect the very heart of what and how universities have taught for centuries. It's difficult to say more or more precise things. For a fair assessment, there are multiple factors that would have to be taken into account, many of them still unknown. For example, the regulatory aspect. We see that the EU, the US, the G7, other bodies are working on or advocating regulation. We also saw that creators of these tools themselves are raising now the alarm with, for example, over 1,000 tech leaders signing in March, 2 months ago, an open letter that urged AI labs to pause development of the most advanced systems, that cited, and I quote, profound risks to society. Okay. We also hear multiple warnings that the systems are poised to displace workers, tens of millions of workers in high-skilled white-collar jobs that were previously believed to be safe, okay, from displacement by technology. So while it's clear that the one thing that universities and academics cannot afford to do is ignore the rise of these technologies. It's very difficult, on the other hand, one, to of course know what to do, strategize, but two, also to be content, and this is my own take here, my own perhaps contribution to this debate. It's very difficult to be content with the main argument that is put forth by advocates of these technologies, namely that this is wonderful because it's going to free up time for more meaningful human activity, and that the best response for academics and universities is to educate students to interact with AI, in particular by focusing on the sophistication of prompts. Okay, this is the new thing now, sophistication of prompts. We hear about developing prompt engineering now as an academic skill, because it is now known that the quality of the response of the tool depends, of course, on the quality of the prompt, how you can get an entirely different range of responses to basically the same question on the same subject, depending on you phrase your prompt. Okay, so we're now hearing talk about prompt engineering, likely to become an academic skill. But again, I find these responses, these suggestions that, oh, that's wonderful, it's a wonderful innovation because of the factors I've just mentioned. Personally, I find this a little short, okay? Nevertheless, having pointed out already multiple times that we're in the middle of the fog right now, okay? So it's impossible to predict what will happen even 2 years from now. That's it for me. Thank you for your patience. This one was particularly long compared to what I usually do. However, the subject is important, because in the raising the question of whether this does represent the revolution that everybody's talking about, well, I can't give a yes or no answer, but I can at least say it's possible, okay? Chances are it's possible.